Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lisa Shoshani Anderson, and I'm the lead curator at Arts and Literature Laboratory. I'm joined tonight by artist Lelia Byron, whose exhibition Tierra de Mujer is currently on view through December 19th in the event gallery at Arts and Literature Laboratory. Tonight, we'll hear from Lelia about her exhibition, followed by a short live Q&A. If you have any comments at any point or questions for the artist, please feel free to place them into the comment box. Lelia, I'm handing it over to you.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much to the Arts and Literature Laboratory for this exhibition opportunity, and thank you very much to Lisa and Jim for facilitating this talk. I'm going to share my screen now so you can see the presentation that I prepared. So this is a photo of the exhibition that's currently on view at the Arts and Literature Laboratory. And before I get into more specific details about the exhibition, I'd like to talk a little bit about something that I work with, which is the idea of using art as a way to connect. And when I say connect, I mean both from people to other people and also from people to other ideas. And I'd also like to talk a bit about using art as a way to experiment with different forms of narrative, whether that be linear, spatial, or visual. And I'm going to talk very briefly just about a few previous projects that are relevant to these topics. So this is a project that I did in rural Portugal, and it's actually made out of recycled plastic bottle caps, which I recycled by hand through a very DIY process. We can see in the upper left-hand corner, that is what the shredded plastic looks like. In the bottom left-hand corner, I'm working with the very simple plastic recycling machines, and here's a close-up view of the sculpture. So basically, 2 points about this project is one that using it as an educational tool, because most people don't know that plastic is actually very difficult to recycle, and most of the plastic that people put into the recycling bin to be recycled will never be recycled because it's expensive, because it's difficult to do, and because of the nature of plastic, it degrades every time it's recycled. So it can only be done 1 or 2 times before it's impossible to continue. And another idea behind this project would be to think about how to redefine plastic as instead of something that's disposable or waste, and thinking about it instead as something else. This is a project that I completed this year in Rauman, Finland, where I work with about 5 classes of students at different schools. With the students, we had a bunch of different workshops together, and they wrote stories, imagining different narratives for the boats, where they're going, where they're coming from, who's on the boats, what are they carrying. And then we talked about how to make visual narratives for these boats using symbols. Eventually, we translated those symbols into prints, turned them into the paper boats that you see, and we also audio recorded the stories. And you can see actually this project was interrupted by the pandemic. So with the museum, originally it was supposed to be inside of the museum. And what we did was we turned these stables they had into this outdoor viewing gallery. We kind of just opened the doors and put the speakers there so people could come during the day and see the exhibition. Another idea that I work a lot with is this idea of interviewing and the role of journalism in preparing and researching for my paintings or other projects. In this project, which I did in New Bedford and in Providence, I was where I was living at the time. I read in a local newspaper about a group of people who were trying to unionize and trying to get more rights for the fish factory workers, which is a large industry in the area. I immediately became interested in the topic and started to contact people to interview them and develop this series of paintings. This is the final project I'll share to you before we get to the exhibition currently on view. And this is a project that I did in Sicily, where I also did a number of interviews with people who lived in the area. And the idea of this project was to create a visual record of local oral histories and traditions. And I actually, in addition to interviewing people, I also painted them onto the walls. You can see here I am working on the project. And here are some of the people that I painted into the mural. Okay, so now to talk a bit about the exhibition that's currently on view at the Artlit Laboratory. The title of the exhibition is Tierra de Mujer, which in English means land of women, but it could literally mean the land, the physical land of women, or it could also refer to a more symbolic definition, which would be like earth of woman, and obviously having a more of an environmental connotation there. So I based this project on interviews that I did with a cooperative that's based in Huila, Colombia. There are about 4,000 family farms in this cooperative. Each farm is relatively small, so within 3 to 5 acres, and they have probably around 5 to 10 workers on each farm. And this cooperative has a number of different programs. They help maintain fair wages, they sell at market price, they assist with loans and home repairs, and they also have a number of educational and technology advancement programs for the people who participate, the farmers who are part of it. And also for buyers, on the other hand, they certify the quality of the coffee and put the coffee through rigorous testing controls and quality tests. One particular project that I thought was really interesting was this Mujeres Cafeteras program. And the idea of this program is to basically transition the role of women who from housewives to entrepreneurs. Traditionally, the coffee farming is a male-dominated profession. And so these 300 women who are part of this program, they produce the coffee at a higher quality and get a better, higher price for their coffee. You can see the exhibition from outside the windows at sort of sunset at Artlit Lab. And to give you a bit of context about where Huila, Colombia is, we can see here in the center of this map on the left, here is Bogota, which is the capital of Colombia. And Huila is this department that's actually here. And the specific town which the farmers live in is called Garzón. And we can see the journey from Bogota to Garzón. You must travel actually down the mountain and then back up. We can see this mountain chain right here. So here's a few images of the journey. So on the up top left corner, we can see Bogota, which is a large city. And then we have to travel under the passage of this rock formation, which is called the Devil's Nose. And then here's a photograph of the road, which is very beautiful and very mountainous. Okay, arriving to Garzón, Huila in Colombia. I'm going to tell you very quickly about the coffee production process, how coffee is made, and what are some of the sustainable methods that the women are using in order to produce this coffee. So in the left picture, we can see the coffee plants. And in the right-hand side, we can see the coffee fruit. So the coffee actually comes from a seed that's inside this fruit. And in order to pick those seeds, the fruit must be picked when it's ripe. So a lower quality coffee will include many of the green fruits, and that will be why it will taste very acidic. So a high quality coffee will not include any of the unripe fruits. And that process must be done by hand. Okay, so the next process would be the processing, and basically that's when the seed has to be removed from the fruit, and that can be done through a dry or wet process. And the wet process will include fermentation, And here's where we can see the role of the water in order to, one sustainable point to make is that the water would need to be reused and decontaminated. Here we can see the drying process, and this is done through just the heat, the energy of the sun. So that is a very sustainable method, and different farmers have very different methods, but they are all quite specific and regulated according to dates and times. And some will have these sort of drying racks, and some farmers have their own like large, wide areas, which they then rake through. And the final process is the milling, grading, sorting, tasting, and transporting. And here we can see the role of the cooperative can be very important in helping the farmers to do these final steps. And it's also very important in terms of economic sustainability for the farmers. In developing an idea for a painting, I often start by coming up with many, many quick sketches and paintings to explore the best way to portray a scene or idea. And that includes color samples, looking through many photographs, reference photographs that I take when I'm researching or interviewing people. This is one of the paintings in the series. One common theme in the series is this idea of patterns and cycles, which I think reference both the patterns in nature and also the patterns in the coffee process. We can see the coffee plant here, the fruit of the coffee plant here. And we can also see the two women who are sisters, and their grandmother who's in the center, their mother who's in the center, and the granddaughter who's center front. This painting, I want to talk a little bit about diversifying in terms of the farms. So this farm is actually owned by this woman who's in the center, and she's also repeated on the left and the right. Her name is Argenis, and she has a farm which is very diversified. It grows cocoa. She grows cocoa, bananas, beans, onions, coffee, fruits, and vegetables. We can see the upper left-hand corner. We can see the banana plant in her hands. She has beans, and then we can also see different vegetation in the fields on the right. So this is very important for both economic and environmental sustainability. Again, we have this idea of repetition or cycles. We see the figure repeated throughout. When I was interviewing different women for this, to collect information and for this project, I would travel to each farm and interview women. And one of the questions that I always asked was, how did you come to be a farmer, and how did you come to be an owner of this land? And Argenis has a particularly interesting story. Everyone's story is different, and this story was particularly interesting because she earned this land because the government wanted to buy her original house to build a hydroelectric, and then they offered her either money or land, and she worked with the cooperative to find land that could eventually be turned into a farm. And so now she is a coffee entrepreneur. And speaking on this idea of entrepreneur, one thing that I would like to emphasize is sort of this entrepreneurial spirit of the Mujeres Cafeteras, which is very strong. So some women, for example, are trying to create coffee wine. They're selling baked goods made with coffee, and they're even working on creating their own packaging. So this is the main painting in the project. It's about 15 feet wide. And it's built through a lot of layers. And as you can see, there's a complexity of composition. And I think this also goes back to the idea of many layers involved in the coffee process and in the natural world. On the left panel, we can see some details that I incorporated. For example, this yellow fence, and all of these details that you see throughout the paintings are real things that I saw and experienced, and I thought were relevant or interesting to the story. We can see in the top center, we can see the coffee plant. We can see in the bottom left-hand corner, we can see two women visiting each other, which is a common occurrence in the farms, that people will go to visit each other's farm to bring fruit or vegetables or plants, or just to say hi, because it can be very isolating to be a farmer. In the bottom left corner, we can see the packaging from the cooperative. And the woman in the center, her name is Carolina, and she studied at the university to become an agricultural engineer. And her job is basically to travel from farm to farm and to improve the quality and quantity of the coffee. But she also says that she ends up listening to the farmers a lot because they can feel very isolated living and working on their own farms. She also talked about this idea of new methods and old methods, and how some of the older farmers are very resistant to the new methods. So this is the center panel of the painting. We can see the largest figures here and sort of the main narratives of the painting, I think. In the bottom left-hand corner, we can see the cocoa plants. On the bottom right-hand corner, we can see the coffee plants. Above that is a drying building. Above that, we can see the drying racks. To the left of that, we have a nativity scene made out of stones. And top left, we have a lunch scene, which is actually taken directly from a photograph of a lunch that we had when we were there. And in the bottom left-hand corner, we can see two women who are doing the coffee tasting. So tasting is actually a very interesting process because everyone has different flavors that they have stored in their memory. So when describing coffee, they will have to sort of access those memories and think about what they can remember to describe the coffee that they're tasting. And this is something that you have to study, and you have to go to classes, and you have to be trained in order to taste and classify and grade the coffee. In the third right panel, we can see some more details, such as the dried coffee beans in the bottom right-hand corner. And above that, we can see that this coffee plant, for example, is not all red. That's because different coffee plants have different colors of the fruit. So some coffee plants might have an orange or a pink color as opposed to just a red color. Here we can see a few close-up images of some of the faces in the painting. And just sort of as a final note before we open up to questions, I'd like to go back to this idea of connection. And one of the things that I think is very interesting about coffee is that it's a way of showing and proving how the world is very connected, and how one action in one place can have an impact on people in another, or on the environment in another place as well. And I will leave you with this final image. This is of me drawing at the end of the day in Huila.
Thank you so much, Lelia, for sharing that information about your exhibition. For anyone just joining us, I'm here with artist Lelia Byron, whose exhibition Tierra de Mujer is currently on view at Arts and Literature Laboratory through December 19th. And if you have a question at any point, please feel free to pop it in the comment section. I guess I'll just start off with asking you a few questions myself. Namely, how did you first hear about the Mujeres Cafeteras program and Huila, Colombia? And can you tell us a little bit more about how you came to be so interested in this subject?
Yes, so actually, most of my project topics I sort of stumble along. just I hear about something and I find it interesting. In this case, my husband's cousin is a journalist who works in the area, and he had worked with this cooperative, and he was just talking to me about them. And he mentioned the Mujeres Cafeteras program, and I was immediately interested. And I said to him, "Oh, I'm interested. Can you put me in contact with them?" And then once I started talking to some people from the cooperative, I knew right away I wanted to make this series.
You seem to know a lot about the coffee growing process, going through all the different stages. Were you interested in coffee before this project, or is it something that you grew to learn more about after being immersed in this community a little bit?
It's something that I grew to learn more about. Actually, I don't drink coffee, which is interesting, and so when I was doing this project, I was completely, I learned from zero everything about how the coffee is grown and produced. And at the end of it, I could tell you which is a good cup of coffee or which is a bad. And one of the things that I experienced when I was doing all these interviews is that the people who were working on the farms and the women entrepreneurs, they were extremely warm and welcoming and excited to participate in this project. And so they would feed me lunch and a lot of coffee. So I had a very strong introduction to coffee.
Thanks for mentioning the community's reception to your project. I'm really interested in it and how you came to stay with this community. Did you stay on site? I mean, how was that immersion process? How long were you in Colombia for this project?
So the interviews were extremely intense. I think in total, I probably visited between 10 to 15 farms. And this cooperative is very advanced, and they have a new hotel that they've built, I think, in the past 10 years. And so they invited me to stay in the hotel, which is a very beautiful hotel because the whole thing is coffee themed. And so, they have the images everywhere of coffee, and they also have a very beautiful breakfast and coffee, and the whole thing is very much about connecting with the environment and connecting with the coffee production.
And you spoke a little bit in your presentation about how some of these families and these cooperative members, though there are 4,000 of them, they feel isolated from the other ones. So I'm interested to hear a little bit more about how the community aspect of the cooperative works. Is it a strong community? Do people have strong ties to each other, or are people sort of separate?
I think that it's sort of the nature of the farm, because each farm is maybe 3 or 4 acres, and because it's so labor intensive farming, that people are there from morning to night working on the farms, that they might not have too much interaction with each other, which is why some sort of cooperative or some sort of organization can have a really big impact, because they can organize events, they can organize classes, they can bring people together, and I think that's where that can have a big impact and a big role. But also I think there is like sort of within your neighbors become quite close to you, and they will visit you and you will visit them as a way to see other people and not just stay on your own farm.
So how did you gain entry into this community? How did you start approaching subjects for your interviews and learning those stories?
This is actually very natural. So I like I said in the beginning, I've done this a few times where I start interviewing, and usually it works is that I meet one person, and then I tell them about this idea, and they say, okay, I know someone else who's going to really like to participate. And then I meet the second person, and then they say, oh, this is, I know someone, let me show you to so-and-so, or let me introduce you to so-and-so. And then it's sort of like a spiral until you have then met many people and can tell a more full narrative.
Do these interviews live on in any other way, in any other format? Do you record them? Do you just use them for your personal use? I mean, how do they kind of live on after the project?
Yes. So in these interviews, I had quite a lot of material, but I decided not to write sort of any text, like long text, because I felt that the paintings already had so much narrative in them going on that it was a bit unnecessary. And the one of the previous projects, the one about the factory workers in the Massachusetts and Providence area, I did also write narratives and more like each painting had its own narrative or own story to go with it. Like the project that I mentioned in Rama, that one was audio recorded. So I then compiled everything together and played the audio recordings as you walked. You could see them as, you could listen to them as you saw the installation.
Mm-hmm. Can you speak a little bit more to your process? I know you touched on during your presentation that you often work from sketches and reference photos, but how do those kinds of things interface with your recollection of the visits, your recollection of the interviews, and how does the interview process really factor into the visual aspect of your work when staging or creating a composition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences between a photograph and a painting is that a photograph is kind of a document of one scene or one moment in time, whereas a painting can be a more complete version of an experience. So you can compile many different things. You can compile a mood with also many different things that you wouldn't necessarily see in front of you at one time, but you were experiencing in sort of the same moment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to the idea of process. I think that's really where I start. I think I start with this. Okay, what's the main thing here? What was something that was really original or specific or very important here? And then I start building around that. So I start adding in other things, and then I start playing with, okay, how can I put this together so it makes sense? Maybe I put something on top. Maybe I add something on the bottom, and then just do many different versions of that until I'm fully satisfied.
And with a piece like the largest piece, the triptych of the show, do you try to work in objects from interviews or in any of your other compositions into the kind of narrative of the work?
Yes, definitely. So definitely working in different ideas of the different ideas or things that came up with the interview. That's another thing about paintings as well. Sometimes when someone tells you a story, it's not something that you're experiencing, or even if for yourself, if you're writing your own, you're expressing your own idea, your own story, maybe you don't have an image of that, but it's a visual memory that you have that you can then convey onto the canvas or convey onto the paper.
So how long did this series take you to complete, and what was the timeline from actually being in Colombia to now the works being on display at Arts and Literature Laboratory?
Yes. So I started this project in 2016, and then I didn't complete it until actually this year. With some extra time from the pandemic, I was able to finish, in particular, that last triptych, which was very large and very time consuming. So I think a painting about 5x6 would take me around a month to complete, and something larger would take maybe a few months to complete because of its complexity and size. And it's hard to tell in the photographs, but in person everything is very detailed. So it's all there, and it takes me some time to work it all out and get it to the point where I'm satisfied with it.
No, I think that rich level of detail really does come through even in photographs. And the layers of the details in the paintings, and I know you touched on again in your presentation, this idea of layers of paintings being conceptually tied to the layers of producing coffee, the layers of stages of development and production of coffee. And again, even with the coffee bean itself, the layers involved there. Can you expand just a little bit more on that concept? It's really interesting.
Yeah, so the way that I paint is extremely thick paint, and I start with thinner layers, and then I begin to build with the paint and also with the composition. I think the central point for any painting for me is always the face. It's always the goes back, and that's kind of like a center point in my work. This idea of even if I'm talking about a larger, broader idea or issue, I'm always going back to this idea of people, individuals, humanity, and how everything is impacting that, this person or myself or another person. So the face is always, the central part, the part that gets built up the most, and through many layers, and then moving around that, moving around to other objects, to sort of the background scene, and thinking about how what parts I want to emphasize, what parts I want to leave loose, or more of a suggestion.
Thank you. And again, as a reminder for anyone watching, if you do have any additional questions, feel free to put them in the comment box at any time, and I will pass them on to Lelia. So another question I had with this series, labor, as you mentioned, and is completely obvious from seeing the works, it seems to be a really large theme throughout the series. And many people you have painted seem to be engaged in some kind of task related to coffee growing, or as you mentioned, the entrepreneurial endeavors of the women on these farms. Can you explain a little bit of your thought process for choosing what to depict to expand on this theme and to make this theme clear to the viewer?
Yes, the topic of labor is I think, has a lot to delve into, because it's how people spend most of their time. It's how people spend their time. It's also, where they face a lot of complexities from society, and from how they are valued as people. We can also see sort of larger, broader interests of society, as where do people work, what do they do, what role does that serve, and we can also go back to the idea of individual. What's your role as an individual participating in a larger system, and how is this larger system impacting you? What do you think as an individual, about what's going on in the world in a broader context?
Yeah, and that feeds really nicely into this idea that you've mentioned several times now, that the global web of interconnectedness and how coffee really speaks to those connections. Can you expand a little bit on that concept within the context of this project, and how coffee might impact people in an everyday way, that through a global interconnected kind of mode?
Right. So, coffee is a staple for many people, in many parts of the world, and but it is grown and produced by certain people in one part of the world, and so this is a really good example of how. So, for example, if something is to happen to that production of that coffee and the people who produce that coffee, what type of impact that would have on the people who are drinking it and using it, and if something were vice versa, if something were to happen to the people who are drinking it, what would happen then to the people who are producing it? We can also think about, the environment. So if something happens as to the where the coffee is produced, then the impact that will have on people's daily lives everywhere in the world. So I think these two ideas of both human connectedness, and also this idea of people being connected to the natural environment, are kind of this two central ideas in the series.
I think a pretty natural response for anybody watching this or who has seen your paintings in person and learned a little bit more about the stories of these cooperative farmers would be to ask, is there a way for us here in Wisconsin or wherever as consumers to support them, and how could we go about doing that?
Yes, so actually maybe should I put in we'll send the name of the cooperative is Coocentral, and I just put that, sent that to you if you want to share that in the chat. They have their own website, and I'm sure you can find information about the coffee at their website.
Yes, absolutely. And we can share that website as well on the Facebook event. So you did briefly touch again on this idea of the connections between coffee and worldwide consumers and drinkers of coffee, producers of coffee. And I'm interested to hear how that concept may have influenced you to create all these different narrative connections between your paintings. As you mentioned, a lot of your narrative is not necessarily linear, but obviously all of the works in the exhibition are quite obviously connected through narrative. So would you mind expanding on that concept a little bit, that connection through narrative?
Sure. So thinking about the large painting, you'll notice that I did not separate those three panels, and that I decided to make one huge painting because I was struggling for a long time. I had interviewed so many people, and I was really struggling to think about how to now make these stories. And at the end of the day, I decided that really I was trying to separate narratives that weren't necessarily separated. It was all part of one interwoven story. So then I combined all of these different ideas into one, and I felt that that was a better representation of the process of coffee, the natural world, the environment, and also just people's lives in general, not just the coffee farmers, but just everyone in general. And so you'll notice that there's people drinking the coffee, there's just there are people producing the coffee, and there's a sort of many different stages of that process in the narrative, but it's not in a linear form. It's as the coffee production is not necessarily linear, it's more cyclical. So I think that painting sort of reflects that.
Yes, beautifully said. And can you speak a little bit to the visual appearance of the works? They're so bright and vibrant. Was that inspired by the surroundings of the cooperative, of the farms, or is that kind of just how you wanted to depict these stories?
I think that's my natural color palette. I usually like vibrant palettes, and I think that is sort of the way I express a different mood or emotion, which is to sort of create this heightened sense of drama, or heightened sense of reality through these sort of like vivid, intense colors. I think my original inspiration is from the sort of vibrancy of New York City, where I grew up. And that's where, there's just sort of like this intense saturation of advertisements, of like awnings, of signs, it's just constantly surrounded and stimulated by colors. And I think that is where my original color love came from. So not actually from the natural world, but from a more synthetic world. So I did enjoy working with this nature element and bringing these vibrant colors, but still natural colors into the paintings.
Well, I have one final question for you, unless anyone watching has any questions to add in the comment box, which I can pass on. Do you have any future plans for this project and the connections that you made with this community of growers and farmers?
Yeah, so actually the paintings eventually will be heading back to Colombia. And they will be, some of them will be finding a permanent home in the cooperative.
That's wonderful. Lelia Byron, thank you so much for joining us to talk about your current exhibition on view at Arts and Literature Laboratory through December 19th, Tierra de Mujer, which is again on view in the event gallery. You can check our website for viewing hours and open hours if you want to go by and see that before it closes. Thank you so much, Lelia.
Thank you.
And if you want to support future programming like this, you'll see information on your screen shortly. Thank you again to everybody. Thank you to Lelia, and thank you so much to James Krell for tech coordination, and good night. Thank you, everybody.